the regular school board meeting of the Northfield Public Schools. It is Monday, August 25th, 7 p.m. Dr. Richardson, there were a couple items in our table file.
Yes, we've got a couple of items. First, a follow-up document on the school board work session that we'll be using as part of the discussion for tonight's meeting in terms of the enrollment, demographic, and district master facilities plan work. We also have a summary of the superintendent's evaluation that Chair Iverson will be presenting later. We also have a number of personnel items, including appointments, increases, decreases, and change of assignment, and resignations.
All right. If there's no objection, we will add these to the agenda as we move forward. All right. Time for public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the community to address the board. And I see that we do not have members of the community here, so we'll move on. Move on to approval of the minutes. Board members, you have in your packets the minutes from the last school board meeting, which were on August 11th. Is there a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Julie, seconded by John. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The minutes are approved. Announcements and recognition.
Okay, we have just a couple of announcements this evening, and I think, Julie, you have an additional announcement that you'd like to share. First of all, we'd like to recognize Prime Time. It's being recognized nationally. Northfield is going to be invited by the National League of Cities to participate in its first Advanced Level Leadership Academy on after-school system building. The NLC is offering to fly reps from Northfield's Primetime Network to Washington, D.C. in December to meet with representatives from 14 other communities spanning the country to discuss the best practices and model work that these 15 communities are doing to build citywide after-school programs. So we're in pretty good company. Among the other 14 cities invited include Minneapolis, St. Louis, Oakland, Omaha, Atlanta, Dallas. I'm guessing we may be the really small one that's taking a really positive lead. And so again, thanks to all the folks involved in that process, and Aaron and your folks in terms of really helping make that thing go. I also would like to just share that a new teacher workshop was last week. It went off very well. Mary is still upright, vertical, and smiling, which is great. But we had a great 2-day session, and again, we've gone now this last year or so with the concept of moving to a 2-year session, because we really felt as we got to the end of the first day when we were doing 1 day only that the teachers looked like somebody to run over them because of just the level of and intensity of information that they had to absorb. And this has given us a lot more opportunity to share technology information, to share information about professional learning communities, about curriculum, about all the different pieces that we work with. Also gives the chance for a variety of different people to speak to them and talk to them about all the things that they're going to run into in that first year of teaching. And even though we have teachers that span the gamut from those that are first-year teachers who've never had another teaching job to one individual that I believe has 30 years of experience in teaching, I think we had a really good start and a really good opportunity for those folks to get an orientation to our school district. And thanks to Mary for honchoing, planning, dealing with all the logistics, making it happen.
Great. Other announcements? Julie?
I just had a recognition for an organization called Operation Backpack, and for the past 23 years, it's a volunteer organization that has provided backpacks filled with school supplies for those families in our district that are in need of this assistance. And in 2013, they provided 561 children grades K through 9 with backpacks, which represents almost 14% of the students in our district. And this year they anticipate the need to be the same or greater. This group works in collaboration with the Community Action Center representatives from our district, as well as individual donations and local businesses they partner with to provide financial support. So we sincerely appreciate their efforts to ensure that our students are ready to begin the school year.
That's great. All right, other? No?
On this exact date, the 25th of August, at about this same time, Lois and I exchanged our marriage vows 52 years ago. So, thank you all.
And so how deep trouble are you in tonight?
The vows didn't include not going to school.
Not going to school? Okay.
Thank you, Lois.
Yes. Thank you, Lois, for
Thank you.
loaning him to us for the evening. That's all good.
She's off to Carlton to a concert.
Very good.
Other announcements? All right. We are ready to move on to our first item, which Dr. Richardson will present the state of the district. So I'll remind board members you had in your packets a detailed list.
Okay, this evening, as we've done now for the last several years, I want to take the opportunity to talk to you about celebrations and challenges. Oh, that's an interesting noise. Celebrations and challenges. And really thinking about the Northfield Public School District, thinking about the things that I think as a district we can be really proud of because of the work that's been done, but also taking an opportunity to kind of look at what the big rocks are going to be as we move forward into the 2014-15 year. And knowing that every year, as much as we get accomplished the year before, there are a number of things that are facing us that we need to be able to deal with. So I think it's a really good opportunity for us to share that together, and then I will be happy to try to answer any questions that you might have. If there are any really tough questions, Matt or Aaron will be ready to answer those. Okay, let's start then. First of all, in terms of the Board of Education, which is always where we start, I think one of the most powerful things that happened this last year was, as a board, you determined to undertake enrollment demographic study in the district master facilities plan. Again, I think this is a very positive move on your part in terms of saying we really need to prepare ourselves to look out 10 to 20 years and really think about what are we going to need for facilities as we move farther into the 21st century. That started, obviously is still going forward, but began with your decision to let that happen. The second piece we looked at was the calendar format, and although we didn't talk anything about year-round school this last spring, we did talk about the options for snow makeup days and really put an option into the calendar not only for students and staff for this year, but also what to do in case we had more than 3 snow days last year, and we did. And we did have, I think, a very positive activity at the end of the school year where we had teachers come back for an additional day and were able to do a number of activities, including kind of a wrap-up of the PLC process, kind of thinking about where things were going, and also for the various buildings to really think about the processes they were working through. We also, as a board, you dedicated time to review the efforts of PLCs. We decided to do it a little bit differently, and we'll talk about that in a little bit in terms of looking at moving toward the end of the year to do that PLC review. You offer the opportunity every time at every board meeting to talk about student and staff accomplishments, which I think is very powerful. And you spend a good deal of time over a 2-month period talking about school improvement plans and really taking a look at those plans, thinking about the progress reports from the previous year, and again, the plans moving forward for the next year. In school board policies, the big one was the anti-bullying policy. We'll also talk a little bit about that later on, but obviously the board was prepared to work through that process. We really didn't have to make a lot of changes in our policy because we already made adjustments and modifications, and so when the new policy came out, we were able to make the changes without a whole lot of substantive effort to get that happen. We also took a look at the district strategic plan, and as we've done for the last several years, pronounced it good. It really does what we want it to do. It stays at the 50,000-foot level, and as I shared with the new teachers here in this last week, it still resonates to them now, I think, the way it resonated to us 10 years ago when we put it together. Again, I think a lot of our other plans are tighter and really get into detail about expectations from year to year. But the district strategic plan really steps back and looks at the strong set of beliefs and mission for the district. We also looked at DPAC goals. Again, I think that's been a continuing and positive piece. And again, you received information from DPAC last spring and approved moving forward with those goals as part of the process. We also continued the charter school evaluation of Arcadia and Prairie Creek, which includes at least a full-day visitation with each of the buildings and a report out to their board and other folks. And it also includes ongoing support by myself and other members of the administrative team to make sure that everything stays on track. In terms of the celebrations for teaching and learning, some of the key pieces there, and you will not hear this will not be the last time we talk about this, but we talked about expansion of the role of the Director of Teaching and Learning. And so as Gary's position cycled out and as Mary came on full-time in terms of looking at other opportunities that we could work with that made sense to put together, we really looked at how she could support the RTI model, RTI coaches, and PBIS and MTSS, the multi-tier systems of support, as well as the title programs, which again she and Gary worked on over the time of this first year to get her ready to do that, and also to look at her role in terms of the Area Learning Center and the Longfellow Building. All of these really fit very well together, and I think it gives us a much more uninterrupted structure of support for those pieces because they're all tied back to teaching and learning, and so it makes sense for them to be there. We also implemented response to intervention, RTI and RTI coaches, and continue to expand that process and expand the process with the Accelerate Northfield volunteers, with making plans again to hire a part-time coordinator for the Accelerate Northfield volunteer group, and to really think about how do we make that an ongoing, maintainable portion of our district's operation, specifically to support interventions at the elementary level. We also worked and continue to work on systematic interventions at the middle school level. As we've done now for a number of years, continued with the 9th grade academy and 10th grade seminar. The big thing now is we're kind of going regional now in terms of presentations that are being made by the group of folks that are involved in the academy. Actually had 25 different school districts come for a training session this summer to learn about the academy and how they might be able to replicate it in their own school district. And I think we're continuing to see this reap benefits, and of course the greatest benefit is this significant sustained reduction in the number of students that fail a class as freshmen. So that's a powerful piece. We also expanded cognitive coaching, continued to increase the number of folks that are trained in cognitive coaching and the use of cognitive coaching on a regular basis with informal operations between individuals, but also with formal work, especially at the high school level, where those cognitive coaches work with new teachers and help support them, as well as any of our veteran teachers that request the opportunity. Also, we looked at common planning, instruction, flexible grouping, interventions, and collaboration, all words that you've heard before, and know that those are kind of the hallmark of the way we operate at our elementary level. The flexible grouping has become a very powerful process, which is now being used throughout the elementary buildings in both math and reading. And with the common planning time and instructional time that is in place because we have the right combination of specialist teachers in place, we have that ability for teachers at each grade level to get together and plan. We also are continuing to work with differentiated instruction, except it's differential. Anyway, it's got a few too many IAs in it, but I just didn't want to wait till one of you said, wait a minute, that didn't spell right. I know it's not spelled right. But we do continue to use the differentiation process of saying, how do we think about ways that we can help kids to learn? And when kids already know, what can we do to help expand that horizontally, give them more options and more breadth? or expand it vertically in terms of letting them move ahead? How can we help students that are struggling to get the kind of additional time and effort that's needed? We continue to work, and we'll continue into the future with Bridges to K, 6th grade web, and 9th grade link crew. Bridges to K just completed their work. A little bit tricky this year, but we also had some real great support from Emmaus Church, who volunteered to allow us to use the Emmaus Church for the entire Bridges to K at Greenvale Park while the work was getting done, not only on the roof, but also on the parking lot and driveway area. And they were fantastic to work with. And Aaron has nothing but praise for their efforts to kind of do whatever we needed to have them do to help us make this piece work. We also did get a chance, however, to get those kids into the building, so they got a chance to tour and so on, just as we allowed the other kids, obviously, who didn't have major building construction going on to be in their buildings for that period of time. We also looked at modified compañeros. Again, we're moving through the process. The new 4th grade Spanish literacy. We kind of finished up the concept with the ESLK and the format that we had previously, where we really focused on, first of all, Spanish literacy. And we'll talk a little bit about how that's adjusting and changing as we go into this next year. But again, this is something that I think people are finding to be a really interesting strategy and concept of doing the team teaching strategy with ESL staff and regular ed staff working together to help support students so that we can get those kids with the kind of skills that they need to move forward effectively in 1st grade. We are continuing to work with class size and contingency staffing. We continue to have that 3.0 FTE in place. The good news is, as we're moving toward the end of the compañeros modification, now we're really seeing that staffing being used now for more, here's something we weren't expecting, like as we go into 2014-15, we needed a 5th section of kindergarten. We had contingency funding to do that. We need some additional support at the middle school because of the sizes of some of the 8th grade classes going forward. And so we're able to use those dollars to make that happen without really having to try to figure out where the money, whether it's the money going to come from, where's the staff going to come from. We're continuing the curriculum review cycle, again, which is going to be an important part of World's Best Workforce, important part of the Common Core efforts, at least in Minnesota. And again, the ongoing piece that we work with there is not only getting the curriculum written, but then also doing the training for staff, again, where DCSDC has a real part in helping to make that happen. Also, continued online and blended programming at the high school level. We also are continuing with the world-class instructional design, or WIDA standards, and have really made progress in terms of supporting our EL kids with those standards as the new measures for performance of EL students. We've also supported the transformational technology. We implemented the SAMR model this year, and we were in the substitution phase during the 2013-14 year, and we do really feel that we got staff, everyone, to at least to that point. We got a lot of staff that are way beyond substitution, but even for those that are finding the technology more difficult, they were at least at the substitution level. We also took the time this year to develop an all-day kindergarten plan and to have that ready for 2014-15. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we get into the challenge pieces. And we expanded the math core and reading core. And again, that has been a really positive piece that we've had, that actually we just continue to have more opportunities to put more math and reading core folks into our buildings. And it's a very powerful effort because it's a very structured, very organized strategy. Really gives us another way of really taking a look at how a specific set of interventions can support kids. In terms of celebrations for teaching and learning, in terms of assessment accountability, we also have begun and continued work with Northfield Promise, really focusing on how do we address the state accountability statute, World's Best Workforce. And the great thing there is the work of Northfield Promise is so tightly fit with the work of World's Best Workforce, that it has made it almost, I don't want to say too easy, because nothing is too easy, but it's made it great in terms of the fact that the focus points, the focus of readiness for K, the focus of having students socially and emotionally supported in school, the concept of literacy, the concept of prepping students for the world of work in terms of careers in college. All of those things being part of World's Best Workforce, but also being part of what the Northfield Promise is about. We've also expanded universal screening and progress monitoring and implementation of RTI services. It has really blossomed in 2013-14 in terms of really having now created a set of strategies in place for both reading and mathematics, RTI coaches that are trained to do those and are busily training staff to be able to implement those appropriate interventions. And what we're finding is there's a small core of interventions that does great things for lots of kids. And at the same time, if we find a student it isn't working for, we have a solid problem-solving process that gets us to looking at what's another strategy or strategies that we might try. We also spent 13-14 working on RTI and PBIS implementation at the secondary level, and the focus was on training. And Mary and her staff were able to get training. We were selected to be trained by the folks with PBIS, and so basically we had both a middle school team and a high school team that received training. That was the first year of training. Now they have a second year of training and preparation for full implementation in the 2014-15 year as we finish up that training this next year. But having that training in place has really made a difference because we've now created a core of individuals in both buildings who understand the concept and are moving forward with it. We obviously continued weekly PLCs, a major driver for school improvement in our district. We also moved away from doing what we have done the last several years, where we kind of given you a once-a-month peek into PLCs to kind of take a look at what was going on, getting an opportunity to hear the specifics of what was happening in a particular PLC in a particular building. We moved to end-of-the-year presentations, and Mary again orchestrated an opportunity for us to hear from presentations from each level. Again, to give you anecdotal information about how PLCs were working and the impact they were having on staff and students. And then we moved again to really strengthen the EOPs, the evidence of practice documents at the end of each semester, which are all now located on the website where people can take a look at them. We also are continuing with continuous improvement staff development. That's never going to change. That's the core vision as we move forward in terms of the fact that we never really reach the goal. We simply continue to move to it, and when we get to a point where we've got a goal addressed, then we create a new goal. And the staff development is tied very tightly to that in terms of if you're going to make changes for kids, you got to make sure that staff have the skills they need to make that happen. We also have dealt with this last year the new state accountability designations as far as reading well by third grade, and focused on efforts to achieve adequate yearly progress. We still are working with the strategies between how we really help people understand the MMR and really make sure that it does what it needs to do for us. Also, in terms of the district assessment coordination, we continued to work with and think about how do we work with the computer side of that process, because now moving into 2013-14 was the last year we could really do paper, pencil, MCA testing, and so now almost all of the MCA testing is done online. And we also were faced last spring with Roger Jenny's decision to retire, and we worked through the process and were able to hire a DAC coordinator, Hope Langston, who has already hit the ground running and was actually running sometime last spring and hasn't stopped since. As As far as celebrations in terms of student services and special education, we fully implemented the shared special ed director that we talked to you about a year ago. That piece has worked very, very well, and Cheryl has been able to take that role on and really work with it in both districts. We've also done some work to put together the financial support pieces, so we have a lot more coordination in our own district around financial support for special education functions, and also coordination with Faribault. And we also recruited a new assistant director. Again, remembering that when we moved from the full-time special ed person in this district to a shared position, we needed to look at a different structure for the assistant director role, moving from a coordinator to assistant director. And we were very fortunate to be able to hire Lynn Kreminga, who was previously working as the CREC director in Faribault. So if there's any negative to this, sometimes there is movement back and forth between districts in terms of staff, but we get some high-quality people. We also have really seen, even in this first year, some significant increases in the collaboration of other special ed staff between our two districts. We think that's going to continue. We'll talk a little bit more about some other things that's coming up for this next year. We've maintained our joint SPED programs, all of the things that are located at CREC. We've also addressed all the corrective action issues that were identified in the last self-study with special education, and that piece is done. And as you know, last spring we went through the process of determining the need to relocate our district DCD program to Greenville Park, and developed a plan, and that has now been implemented. We also have worked now to complete the joint student services handbooks, and now Faribault and Northfield have exactly the same special services handbooks. So again, with all the employees that are beginning to cross lines between the two districts, they have all the same rules and regs, all the same approaches to operation. We also have really ramped up our assistive technology process. What we're finding there is more and more the opportunity for assistive technology, and whether it's on the iPad or some other device, is really offering opportunities to open doors for kids to learn in ways that we had not thought about before. And finally, we're continuing to do special education staff training. We need to continue to do CPI, CPR training, and other training that's necessary for special education. Celebrations for community services. First of all, the effort has been to expand our MDE scholarship access, and the work there really was around becoming, help me, 4-star or 5-star? 4-star school district, and that gave us the opportunity to accept individual scholarships from parents who chose to attend, and really having ourselves positioned in that way made sure that if we had parents that wished to take advantage of the services, we had the ability to generate dollars from the state to make that happen. We increased the school aid summer program and really have grown that program in terms of thinking about the various kinds of things we're doing, really looking at some different strategies. This last summer we implemented the camp strategy, and so offered the opportunity for students to, especially middle school age students who sometimes found it hard to stay really psyched up about being involved in the summer programming, to really have that opportunity to have something enjoyable, and whether it was Iron Chef or technology, movie making, or whatever, became very powerful. Plus, we had the opportunity, because of the work of Aaron and Daryl, to have students on campus at Carleton in the afternoon, and so had an opportunity for Carleton mentors to work with students from our middle school program. Again, a really exciting opportunity, which I think really ramped up and enhanced the numbers, and I know our numbers stayed up throughout the summer, which is also a very positive piece. We also implemented the environmental learning trip this summer. We've made that full transition. It went like a charm, and we'll talk about it going like a charm again this year. Again, that transition is in place. Everybody who wanted to go got to go, and it was a very positive experience, and we had good support from our own staff in terms of taking on leadership roles. We also worked very hard on, and again, through the efforts of the Community Services Division and also Greenville Park, to secure grant funding for 2014-15 for the community school at Greenville Park. Only one of, help me Aaron, how many? 13 out of 55 districts in the state. We have a grant that's for $97,000 in this going forward in this first year. And if everything goes the way we hope it will go, we actually have up to 5 years of funding. And so we'll also talk a little bit about how that's moving forward as we get into challenges. And also we secured grant funding for PLUS and school readiness. And again, our community partners and agencies and groups continue to step up on a yearly basis to say, where can we help you and support you? And whether that's in kindergarten readiness pieces, whether it's in after-school mentoring programming, whatever, those folks are there and are really supported. Also, as something that you remember from a few years ago, there's always a close watch on the budget because this is the most entrepreneurial part of our school district. And basically, we look at managed budget where we ended up with a positive and growing fund balance. 79,000 kids and adults accessed our district facilities over the course of the last year. And we also, through Aaron's work with the folks at the NCRC, implemented some security upgrades in the youth wing. Again, that's always a little trickier because that has been a city facility. Now we're also moving to a different status there now that it's being run by the partners. But there is a understanding of the need to continue to work on that security upgrade process. As far as administrative services, human resources, staff development, we saw full implementation of the HR business services under the Director of Administrative Services. We completed the first year of the principal evaluation system. We completed planning for the teacher evaluation, and Matt Hillman and his staff did a great job of working through the process with a group of teachers and administrators to really think about what makes a workable and usable system for teacher evaluation and getting that ready to go. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but the plan is in place and we're moving forward with that plan. We also had successful negotiations for 2013-15 with our NEA Teaching Association, and so that's completed. And also continue to work with our self-funded health insurance program, and again, seeing the ability to really control our spending in terms of health insurance, including the fact that as we move into 2014-15, we're moving into 2014-15 with no increase in health insurance benefits, or not benefits, costs for the 2014-15 year. Also a big piece here for the Human Resources Department is the Affordable Care Act. It seems like every time we think we understand all the pieces of it, 3 other pieces show up, and we have to deal with them. And so this is a piece that we need to continue to work with to make sure that we follow all the details. But again, I think because we got a real head start on it, because we were a self-funded district, we seem to be about a year ahead of the curve when we talk to almost everybody else around the state that's trying to catch up with the things that they need to get done in this process. We also were involved in lobbying and working with the legislature and with groups in terms of the bullying prevention statute, made some significant changes from the previously passed House version of the statute. I think we ended up with a bill that is much more workable. We'll tell you more when we get to the end of this first year, but we do believe it has the elements of the old VAS plan, which really, I think, put us in a better position. We also enhanced recruiting and retaining staff, and we continue to use that process because, again, we're looking always at 20 to 25 new people on a regular basis, and we need to be able to make sure we get high-quality folks coming in. In terms of administrative services technology, we implemented phase 2 of the plan, which again, if you remember, was substitution, but also was the implementation of one-to-one iPad initiative for all students in grades 6 through 12, and the pod of pads, 4 to 6 iPads in each K-5 classroom. We continue to tune up our wireless network and all of the backbone of our system to make sure that we have lots of redundancy, but also have the equipment needed so that regardless of where you are in the buildings, you're able to use your equipment and make it work. The technology training continued over the course of the 13-14 year with not only the tech boot camp, but also school year training. Lots of buildings had school training every week for volunteers who wanted to be involved in the process. And not only did the tech folks involved in that process, but a number of our staff who volunteered to work with other staff in their building to help them move ahead in the technology process. A very powerful piece when you can have your colleagues working with you. We also refined the district web pages, productivity software, and the district network platform, and we hired a new director of technology at the end of this last year and continued our 3-year technology plan. In terms of facilities, security, and crisis intervention, obviously the district demographic and facility study will be addressing significant parts of that, really helping us to think about where we are in terms of our 10-year capital plan, in terms of the priorities, the ongoing projects, where we want to go. We have refined facilities and staffing planning. We have continued to work with our modified meal patterns for the regular lunch menu and also looked at new breakfast patterns to get that piece in place. Again, I would say to you, we are probably a year ahead of a lot of districts in terms of really having people in place to really run the system that we want to see in place, and also one that keeps the USDA happy. We also completed our Phase 1 high school cafeteria upgrades this last year, continued the Farm to School initiative, and expanded security measures and training to make sure that we were in good shape, not only with our security entrances, but also did additional training for our staff on armed intruder, which was very well received and was a combined effort between the Northfield Police Department, the Faribault Police Department, and the school district. Then in terms of budgets and finance and funding, we basically maintained a fund balance while maintaining current staff and programs for 2013-14, and we are moving into 2014-15 with the same situation in terms of staffing. Always a good place to be. That's now several years in a row where we've not had to make any cuts in programming or in terms of staffing. And again, because I think we've had a solid plan and we've really worked to make that plan happen. And also, we've really worked on stewardship of operating capital and capital projects levies. And we've come up with a strategy for sustainable leasing for the Phase 2 technology plan, which is continuing to work out for us and will be something we'll be taking a look at as we finish up this year in 2014-15 with teacher units being ready to be recycled in terms of the end of their term, but students units still in just the second year of their plan. Okay, so let's look at challenges. I guess I have a couple more. We also addressed class size issues caused by lack of funding and choice programs, and we're able to do that with using the strategy of the contingency funding, and we also addressed Title I special ed funding. This is going to be a big deal going forward. Mary, our magic number right now in terms of loss, about 25% between the 2 years?
About, yeah. Yep.
So that is the toughest piece we're facing right now, is that between the title funding and special ed funding, we have a budget that is 25% lower than it was 2 years ago, going forward with sequestration. And at this point, there's no hint that that's going to change or stop or be any different. So that's something that is a long-term concern for us. We were very fortunate in terms of being able to make adjustments at the end of the 2013-14 year with some retirements and some movement of staff back into regular ed classrooms. But this is an ongoing piece where you're sitting there saying, you want us to really support kids in need. You're basically telling us that we need to intervene for those students. but you give us 25% less money than you did 2 years ago. Okay, let's talk about challenges. First of all, we've got to monitor those calendar changes we make. We now have some new snow day options, including, remember, the infamous the infamous President's Day possibility of going back to school on that day, depending on when we get snow. Again, we're all hoping no snow this year. Had enough. We won't do that now. But being prepared to deal with that, not only in terms of makeup day for kids on that day, but also thinking about makeup days for staff. We also, I think, this year are going to be looking at considering studying of the school day start times. And again, thinking about some of the research that's coming out, and specifically out of the University of Minnesota, which is taking a look at the impact of school start times on adolescent students and where their brains are and where their bodies are in terms of being awake and ready to function. And again, dealing with all of the pieces of that, which, well, people might say, well, gee, why can't you just do that? There are some significant issues that we would face if we would try to do it because of the kind of busing structure we have with a single-tier busing system, where all of our students who are in the country are picked up at the same time, where the districts that were studied all basically have 2- and 3-tier systems where they're picking up elementary kids at a different time than middle school kids, at a different time than they're picking up high school kids. So the idea of just flipping it doesn't work in nearly the same way, and where there is a huge additional cost if we look at trying to flip when elementary and secondary starts. However, there's some other options and opportunities to take a look at. We want to take a look at those and weigh them carefully, and our hope at this point will be to do more with that discussion as we move into the school year, knowing that right now our focus is on elements of the facilities plan, which gets me to the next item. The effort this year, we hope, will be the completion of the master facilities plan with engagement from staff and parents and community, and really thinking about what that plan should entail, looking at a 20-year, looking out 20 years to think about what needs to happen in terms of deferred maintenance, educational adequacy, and trying to address 21st century skills, and thinking about how do we get real engagement out of our parents, out of staff, out of students, and out of community members as we go forward with that process. We're also going to review efforts of the PLC and improvement teams and look at the district strategic plan, and I will probably ask you again, as I have every year up to this year, are you at a point where you want to come back and look at that again? Probably we'll do that after the board is seated in January. We're now also looking at working to expand the roles of DPAC and goals, because now not only are we trying to support our own goal setting in terms of DPAC, but also thinking about how can the DPAC role and goal work really support the world's best workforce statute. And so as part of that, again, part of that we'll be looking at, can we expand the membership of DPAC. We also would like to think about the possibilities of asking some of the students from the District Youth Council to serve on the DPAC as we go forward this year. We will also look at individual board policies. Right now there's nothing on the horizon, which is good, but again we'll address that as those come up. We'll be expanding the annual evaluation process to include the district annual evaluation and renewal requirements, as well as the annual evaluation of Arcadia and Prairie Creek. So what's happening now is that since the department has said, we're not in charge of the charter schools, the authorizer is in charge of the charter schools, now they are going to take on the role of the evaluator of the authorizers. So this year, for the first time, our school district, along with all the other charter authorizers, will be required to do an annual evaluation and share that with the department. And then we also are going to need to prepare for renewal. And basically, we're in the second tier of authorizers, which means as we go into the spring of this year, we'll need to be preparing for renewal. And there's some piece in it that I think we may struggle with. One of which is there's a significant portion of the points for your evaluation that is tied to, did you go outside your district and try to recruit additional charter schools to authorize? I think we've made a clear commitment on our part that we have no desire to do that. And that we really are only focusing on authorizing charter schools that are within our boundaries. The closest we came was when STEM school got done, not STEM schools, excuse me, when Nerstrand charter got to the point of not having an authorizer at all, and they made a contact saying, if we can't come up with an authorizer, would you be willing? And I said, given the fact that a number of your kids end up coming to us anyway, we would look at that as a possibility. But the reality is we really don't want to be authorizing a charter school in Minneapolis or St. Paul or in northern Minnesota. We just don't have the horsepower to get that done. And the problem is the way the evaluation is written, we will be penalized because we're not actively recruiting other charters. So another interesting twist going forward. I did say these were challenges, didn't I? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. In terms of teaching and learning, guess what? Again, we've looked at expanding Mary's role, and really the key pieces there as we kind of thought about it was the concept of up to this point in time when Roger was in place in terms of the DAC position and before Mary came on board, I had kind of taken on the role of being Roger's direct supervisor. But I think with Mary in place, with teaching and learning, it just seemed absolutely logical, especially with Hope having her background with RTI coaching and whatever, for that assessment coordination to come under Mary's purview. So that's I think Mary will be the last thing that will get added to that process. But that's an important part of kind of putting all the pieces together in terms of everything that has to do with teaching and learning and RTI and all the intervention pieces and district assessment, as well as the work of the ALC and Longfellow, because they're in the building that you currently supervise. Also, again, we have no intention to move away from the 9th grade academy and 10th grade seminar, and we're continuing to do training not only for folks inside our system, but folks outside our system who are interested in that process. We're also now looking at the need to think about interventions for social and emotional needs. This is a big piece, because what we're really finding now is that the more we look at the struggles that kids are having, and especially the struggles that they're having as they move through school, many of those concerns are concerns that are tied to the fact that they're really struggling emotionally or socially, that they may actually have mental health issues, that the family may have mental health issues, and we really need to begin thinking about how we're going to address that, because not only is it impacting that student's ability to be successful, but it oftentimes has an impact on other students within the class. So we need to really work through that process. We're continuing to expand cognitive coaching training, have another group of folks that just finished their first part of the year-long training in cognitive coaching. Again, we're finding that to be an extremely powerful tool for folks to work with their colleagues in terms of improving programming and really thinking through how to address issues. We continue to work on common planning, instruction support, flexible cluster learning, and interventions. We're going to continue with Bridges to K, Web, and Link. This year we will be completing the compañeros modification. Our 5th graders now, this will be the last group that needs to move from our previous curriculum to the curriculum now that has a combination of Spanish literacy and English literacy. And we also are looking at a different kind of ESL program that will move from Spanish only to having a combination of Spanish and English literacy at the kindergarten level. The thing that we hope will also be able to highlight that a little bit is I've got some preliminary conversation with the Commissioner's office. They are interested in coming out and visiting the building and looking at the various kindergarten programming that's going on. So we hope to be able to highlight that for Greenvale Park. We also are continuing to look at class size and enrollment changes, implementing always the next curriculum cycle, because that is a never-ending story. We'll be maintaining our support for our English learners. The SAMR model is continuing, and remember, this year we're into augmentation. And so we're really asking teachers to step up and take that next step. And again, I think with the support of our new Director of Technology, who's already had her feet on the ground since July 1, we're seeing some good results in terms of her ability to work with the process. And as Matt said, she was lucky enough today to only have 200 emails this morning that she needed to respond to. So people, I think, are really interacting with her and wanting to get help and support. We also obviously are implementing for the first time all-day, everyday K for every student in the district this year. And that will be, I think, a powerful piece going forward, and one I think that we're going to be able to handle well. And probably the only hiccup we've had is that we have an additional section of kindergarten that we had not planned on having. In terms of assessment and accountability, we need to continue to ramp up our response to state accountability statutes. We need to work very closely with community and with the community, collaborate with Northfield Promise, also collaborate with the college and career readiness work, and also the workforce development pieces, because all of those pieces now are going to very tightly fit together, and I think we're going to get a lot of basically symbiotic synthesis that's going to occur. Gee, I sound like the Hinta commercial, right? Symbiotic synthesis. No, never mind. You got that. I'm thinking out of the box now. Okay. No, don't get out of the box. Never do that. All right. But I think the piece here is we are in a great place going forward with the idea that we have the community behind us. We have the business community really wanting to work with that. We've got South Central College really wanting to step up and be part of that process. It's just a good place to be going forward. In terms of RTI coaches and classroom teachers, again, our continued implementation of RTI, of universal screening, really getting a really structured universal screening strategy that will be implemented tomorrow for the first time in one of the buildings, and Thursday for the other two buildings with Ready, Set, Go. We'll also look at problem solving, progress monitoring, and scientifically based Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 interventions. And again, as I said, we've really, I think now, got that polished to where we were able to go forward with that. I would ask again, is every teacher ready to do that on their own? Is every PLC ready to do that on their own? Probably not yet, but we hope to be there by the end of the year. Also, we'll complete PBIS training at both the middle school and high school, and be implementing RTI and PBIS as MTSS, or multi-tier systems of support, at the secondary level. We also are looking at professional learning communities and focusing on analyzing data and identifying students and implementing instructional strategies. It is the single most powerful concept that we have in place, because it is the one piece that draws every single teacher in the system together, and as it now ties in tightly with the teacher evaluation process, because the measure of the student achievement is tied to the professional learning community goal. I think that we'll see it even be more universally used for lots of different pieces. We'll continue our year-end presentations and our end of the semester EOPs. That seemed to work very well last year. The board seemed to be very responsive to that. Our plan is to continue to do that. And we are continuing to respond to increased test demands, because despite the fact that we thought we had it all worked out at the state level, where we were going to eliminate the MCAs at the high school and move to the Explore, Plan, and ACT as the measures for high school preparation readiness for career and college, the department, in their wisdom, decided that we needed to keep both. And so we will continue to have a full set of MCAs up through 11th grade. And on top of that, every student will be taking the ACT on April the 28th of this year. My hope is that as we get back and get the legislature moving, we're going to try to do some pushback there. I think the department may even be interested in pushing back on that piece with the Department of Education. But right now, they are not willing to do that. They are basically saying The department wants us to keep the MCAs in place because that's the only thing that will measure every single goal that we have as a state, and therefore, because the ACT doesn't measure every single goal that's in place for high school students in math and reading, we're going to do both parts. The other thing I think it's important, and I want to say this now because the impact won't be felt till the end of this year, but our scores in terms of the ACT went back up, bounced up over a point again this year, kind of what we expected to happen. And we are waiting to kind of see how that plays out in comparison to the rest of the state. We already know in terms of scores, we're a point or a point and a half above the state in every single area. And we're a significant percentage above in terms of the number of students who are ready in any of the areas in terms of instruction or in the composite. But what we do know is the minute we have 100% of our kids take the ACT next spring, the first headline you're going to see is ACT scores plummet dramatically. And they will. They will go down probably anywhere from 2 to 3 points. And it's simply because the last 20 to 25% of the students that in many districts have never taken an ACT or never even thought about taking one will be required to take one this spring and used as a measure. If we have any advantage over lots of other districts, we were already this year, I think, at almost 85% of our kids taking the ACT. So we have a really high percentage of students there. But what we know from other states who have gone through this, they saw a precipitous drop in their scores simply because you're now measuring kids that traditionally would never have taken the ACT test. So just be aware that that's coming. The other thing, obviously, in terms of test demands is the full-on use now of technology for every single piece. And so, again, this puts stress on our technology support because we have to make sure that everything is in place. And despite a significant amount of lobbying on our part with the department, they still have not figured out how they can provide those tests except in a closed computer lab with hardwired computers. Despite the fact that I think the technology is there to make this web available, we're not seeing Pearson interested in going there, and we're back with Pearson again. So that'll be another issue going forward. It'll be being sure that we can maintain and also understanding that there will be at least 6 to 8 weeks in the spring that the computer labs will be off limits for everything. And the only good thing in that situation is at least we have the iPad capability for kids to be able to get to technology, even though they can't get on the computers in labs. In terms of special education challenges, we'll continue that shared special ed director position. I asked Cheryl the other day, are you coming back? You're going to keep doing this? She said, yeah, I think I'm good to go. And our new assistant director has jumped in and is in the pool and swimming, and that's all good. And we also are going to be sharing a new assistive technologist for 2014-15. Assistive technologist people there's like hen's teeth, and then there's rarer than that. Those people are really rare. And so we have the capability of sharing an assistive technologist between Faribault and Northfield. We think we'll get much better service there than trying to get part-time folks hired in various districts. So that'll be another move. Again, we're implementing all the pieces in terms of the CREC program. We're also looking at doing some shifting of some of our psychologist role, because at the secondary level, it's very clear that both middle school and high school really want to use their staff psychologists as part of their multi-tier systems of support. And so they both agreed to do that as part of the process. And we're looking at this point, providing some overload pay to give them the ability to get that done and also to work on due process efforts. We also are implementing mandated district-wide restrictive procedures. We're fully implementing that joint student service handbook. We will be implementing again this fall and have everything ready to go, the relocated ECD program. That part is already up and ready to run, and we'll get the training pieces that need to be in place, including CPI. We'll also be supporting the collective impact of the Northfield Promise. Aaron has been stellar in terms of getting the early childhood portion of that program working and thinking about that readiness for K and what that needs to take a look at. And she and Sarah Line and other folks have really put some effort on that and made sure that that part of Northfield Promise is going forward. We'll also be expanding the model for early childhood programs to effectively serve all the students, including those that are most at risk and their families. And again, looking at, are there ways we can not only support those kids that we are reaching out to, but continuing to think about how do we reach out to kids that for whatever reason are choosing not to be involved. And not only do we have money, but we continue to ask for money. And so securing grant funding for PLUS and school readiness is still a part of the agenda for community services. We're also going to be implementing staffing and programming of community school model at Greenville Park. We have hired our 2 coordinators. So it's Laura Berdahl and Catherine Schmidt, who will be the new part-time coordinators for that particular position. Aaron did some very, very creative staffing to think about how to make that work the best. So we have kind of the best of both worlds. We have somebody that really knows the territory in the building, and we have somebody that really has firsthand experience in terms of community school outreach from Arizona, I believe. So we really have the opportunity, I think, to make a powerful difference as we move forward with that model. Continuing to implement the security modifications and maintaining a balance of revenue and expenditures so they're always in the black. As far as administrative services, HR, and staff development, basically we have to complete 15 either bargaining or meet and confer efforts to get all of those units in place. Right now we have 13 of the 15 completed, and so I believe we still have technology folks who I think are just so deep in whatever else they got to get done right now that they've said this is not the time for us to try to get this done. And then we have a few people that are just in a group that we just need to figure out how best to address them, because they're kind of one-offs. They're a particular individual with a particular skill set that doesn't match any of the other bargaining groups. We'll also be monitoring our self-funded insurance program, but again, I think in a very positive place. We're continuing to build fund balance, and we are looking at 0 increases. We have to continue to respond to Affordable Care Act, and again, I can usually tell because about once a week, either Molly or Matt are meeting together, or they're coming to see me or whatever, because we continue to have pieces that as the rules for this thing are coming out, we're having to try to figure out how to address those rules. And it's kind of some bizarre things that are really tied to the fact that it was not created with the understanding of the variety of different kinds of hiring situations we have, and people who have multiple jobs, and people who have different contracts in different groups, and a certain number of hours in different groups, and so on. But we're going to continue to persevere to get that done. We're continuing to work on the best ways to recruit and retain, continue to work on job descriptions, rankings, and like every year as we've done in the past, we'll go through that process of offering the opportunity for people who want to ask about their job ranking. We give them an opportunity to have that reviewed, and again, we use Kathleen Murphy, who is able to come in and work with us to get that to happen. We're continuing to tighten up, I think, on manuals and handbooks. What you'll notice now in contracts, as you begin to see those on the website, is all of the non-licensed contracts, or all of the contracts other than the teacher's unit, we are trying to synthesize so they are the same. So if you want to look at insurance benefits, you're going to find those in Article 5, no matter which contract you're in. As you can imagine, because these contracts and agreements grew up over a 30-year period, we had stuff all over the place. And so a lot of the work that Matt and Molly have been doing have been to rewrite and modify the contracts so that they're all in line. And it just makes life a lot easier when you're maintaining all those contracts. Also, we're implementing the principal evaluation plan as we have, and we'll be doing the full implementation this fall of the teacher evaluation system. And again, the key piece there is significantly more interaction between teachers and principals. We're looking at a strategy that will involve a lot more walkthrough types of evaluations where they're in the room for 5 to 10 minutes and gather data about what's happening in the classroom, doing that on multiple occasions over the course of the year, doing summative evaluations every 3 years, but formative evaluations for every teaching employee every year. We'll also be looking at the integration of HR and finance software and really trying to get that smoothed out. We still have issues where they don't talk to each other very well, and some of the things that are in one are not in the other, and we want to try to see if we can get that addressed. And we'll be monitoring that new bullying prevention statute, especially in terms of the kinds of man-hours it takes to identify and follow up on each identification of a possible bullying incident, how that is working and how it's being addressed. In terms of technology, in terms of administrative services, we'll continue that implementation of Phase 2 technology and really take a look at, again, the augmentation phase. We'll be maintaining expanded technology training and support. A lot of the work through the entire summer, again, we went away from boot camp to Tech Tuesdays. Had, I think, a great turnout from staff. Again, in many cases, trained by their fellow staff members to look at a variety of different programs, but gave people who had sometimes in the past said to us, well, that, you've set technology, the tech boot camp on 1 week, I'm going to be on vacation. Now I have no reason they can't get there. So that's worked out well, and we'll continue to look at how we continue those efforts through the school year. We're looking at maintaining the replacement cycle for technology, but we're also going to review the leasing models for hardware and software, because again, we do have the disconnect because we do have teachers that are at the end of their 3rd year and students that are in the 2nd. So we want to take a look at the leasing models to see if we want to continue with that off cycle or we want to look at something different. We also will be looking at web pages and web-based productivity apps and software, and not only continuing the 3-year technology plan, but also developing the new plan for 2015-18, because we need to create a new plan every 3 years, again, courtesy of NDE. In terms of facility security, crisis intervention, child nutrition, basically the completion of the district master's facilities plan is high on the agenda. Again, we'll look at the projects in the capital plan, but we'll also try to think about how do we align those 2 plans together. We'll continue to address building security, and we'll implement additional facilities upgrades to kitchen and cafeterias. Our new meal patterns now are not only new meal, school breakfast program, but also healthy snack, because we have to control snacks now that occur anytime from midnight. So I guess if you're a gremlin, we're going to take care of that. Anybody seen Gremlins? No. Okay. So I came up with something that nobody knew. Never mind. But also looking at the school breakfast program, but healthy snacks, so that anytime between midnight and 30 minutes after school, we have a very tight limitation as to the kinds of snacks that can be available and provided. So, Noel, piece you've had with a parent that's been concerned about sweets at the middle school in terms of sales during the day is not going to be an issue anymore. It's also not going to be an issue at the high school. So unfortunately for you Valentines out there at the high school level, your boyfriend or girlfriend will not be able to buy you a crush as part of your piece. So there's just some significant twists that are going to go there as that tightens up even further. Finally, we'll maintain the farm to school initiative that's been very successful. In budgeting and finance, we've got to look at maintain cash balance, budget reserve. We need to look at the fact that the state funding is still uncertain. Again, remembering we only had 1.5 and 1.5 for this last 2-year biennium. We got an extra 0.5% added on for the second year. Remember that 1.5 and 1.5, or even 1.5 and 2, does not match the level of inflation. And the reality is then, at the end of this 2 years, we have less money in real dollars to spend than we did 2 years ago. We have over $2,000 less money to spend on educating every child per child than we did 20 years ago. So that continues to be an issue for us. We're going to need to continue to look at where we at for shortfalls, delays, underfunded mandates, and we're going to need to think about where do we go as we take a look at the 15-16 year. Because if you remember your 7-year projections, we're coming to that point where we may need to make some budget adjustments to be online for this next year in terms of the ability to stay where we want to be in terms of our budget. We're going to maintain stewardship of our operating capital and capital projects, continue that sustainable funding for iPads. We'll also deal with class sizes, mainly now not because of compañeros, but because of either lack of funding, because now we're seeing Title I positions disappearing, or because of statutory changes. And we're going to continue to prepare because there is no let-up in the reduction of the title and special ed programs. That's an ongoing reduction in those programs every single year till they shut off sequestration. And that, folks, is the celebrations and challenges. I'm looking for glazing and for you to tell me, do you have any questions?
It's a lot to take in. Board members, do you have questions or comments?
And while you're thinking, again, the important thing for you here is you have a 2-page document that goes through and describes celebrations, a 2-page document that goes through and explains challenges. So my hope is, again, that that's something that you can use as a board member. I know I've had a couple of board members that have said to kind of keep it by phone. Somebody calls and said, well, I want to know something about what's going on in your school. This is probably the most condensed version, even though I've spent an hour going through it, of kind of everything that's been going on in the school system over the last school year.
Rob?
I have a couple of things.
Sure.
If I can talk through my allergy attack here. The first thing, I mean, since this is the second time I've had one of these presentations given to me on the school board, I'm impressed how every year there are things that are celebrations that are also the challenges for the next year. And I think that the way that the district follows through on things, and they have ongoing initiatives, that they're not just responding to the latest trend. They're actually following through and trying to make sure that what they do is effective over the long term. So that is really impressive in both the challenges and the celebrations. And then I was wondering about the special education. I remember you talking about a meeting you had with Congressman Klein.
Yes.
Where you talked about how this assistive technology, and there are ways that you can reduce the cost of delivering the services, and yet they still require you to spend the same amount of money. Has anything moved on that?
We have not been able to get anyone at the Department of Ed to listen to what the concern is. The piece that Rob is talking about is a piece called maintenance of effort. And what maintenance of effort says is that whatever you spent the previous year, you can't spend less than that. So even if you come up with assistive technology that used to cost $5,000 because it took a very expensive piece of technology to do the work, and now you can get the same technology on an iPad app for $99, you still have to spend the $4,900 or $5,000. And so we have not yet been able to get them moved off of that. Now, the flip side is they've not given us any more money either to speak of. I know that Congressman Klein, and I met with him, I think 2 weeks ago, they have put in to try to do an increase in special education funding for the 2014-15 year. And although I think he believes they can get it through the House, nothing seems to be going through the Senate. And of course, if I talk to Senator Franken's office, I had Senator Franken's education person in my office last week. Of course, they're saying, we're trying to do all these things and the House won't do anything. So, but the frustration right now, Rob, is we just cannot get them either to fund it, even though, the good thing is after our meeting with Klein, and he actually came here and met with special ed students and parents and an opportunity to talk to special ed teachers, he came back, wrote a letter of advice to his colleagues who were chairs of the other committees saying, quit looking at funding new educational programming, simply fully fund special ed. There has still not been any movement to get that to happen. And as you said, the problem is going to be, even if we get that done, the quirk in it will be in those places where we could free up money after sequestration to help keep staffing in place, we may not be able to do that because of the way the process works for maintenance of effort.
And then I just had one other thing, which was about the requiring both the MCAs and the ACTs.
Yes.
When my sons a couple of years ago took the ACT, we paid for it and we went over to Cannon Falls to take it. So I'm just wondering about the budget implications. Is the state now paying for two separate tests, and are they going to be delivered here, or?
The state will only pay for one test for 11th graders on April the 28th. All 11th graders will be required to take it. Some of the things that we've begun to foreshadow concerns with the department about, if you think about it, you have students that take the test 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times, may have taken them 2 or 3 times before we get to that April 28th date. Will that have an impact on how they perform on the ACT? It likely could, because they will have had practice taking the test. And again, the way ACT is set up, whatever your highest score is the score that gets reported. But the scores that are reported for the state will be the scores from the April 28th test only. So no, the only test that they will pay for will be the single administration of the test in April 28th, just as they're currently doing a single administration of the plan test and the explore test earlier in the year for 8th grade and 10th graders.
No?
You have a significant listing of accomplishments. I commend you and your organization for that. It certainly speaks well, in my mind, of the district leadership, but also for all of the other participants who make sure the district works. And thank you.
Yeah, this is not something you can do on your own. This is because we've got just a great group of administrators and a great group of staff that are working every day to support kids.
Julie?
I just want to echo Noel and Rob's comments as well, because I think, I agree, I absolutely cherish this document because it's really comprehensive, and I think for me, I think the entire district can be really proud of this, and it really showcases, as a progressive school district, we do have a laser focus on student achievement, and this report really focuses and showcases that well.
Thank you.
John?
No, I'm not going to do that. I just had a clarification question
Sure,
on the
absolutely.
ACT test, because now I'm confused about it. So is it just the 11th graders that need to take the ACT test, or is it all students will be taking the ACT
Well,
test?
every 11th grader. So that means whenever you're in 11th grade at Northfield or any other school district in the state, you will be required to take the ACT test on April 28th of next year. And the following, and then from every year then on, so that all kids will have taken it once in their high school career. But what we do know is that we have lots of kids that take the test multiple times, either to help increase their score or whatever. And just because they take it on the 28th doesn't mean they won't retake it again as a senior. Many of our students retake it again a couple of times as seniors, because they really are about trying to make sure they have their highest ACT score, but that will not count towards our state statistics. The only test that will count will be the April 28th test.
But students in other grades will continue to take the MCA tests.
Yes, and 11th graders will still take the
Well-
math MCA test
And the ACT test.
and the
on
ACT test.
April 28th.
And I didn't mention, but the other thing that will happen is students who have not done very well on the plan test and maybe are struggling are also going to get to take the compass test, which identifies the areas where they need to increase their skills, with the idea that then over the course of time in their 11th grade year, before the 11th grade administration of the ACT, then school districts are required to help support them with potential intervention, support, tutoring, etc., to help them address deficits. And the advantage for us is at least we've been doing the Explore test for a number of years, ever since they first offered the Explore in the plan as a option for school districts. So, we will have a full contingent of students ready that if they need support, will get the compass and then go forward. There are a number of other districts that chose not to do the plan or the Explore, and they're all now going to have to not only take the ACT, but they're going to have to figure out a way to start taking the plan and Explore. That's the good side of our challenge is we've already done that.
Thank you.
Does that make sense, sir?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Julie?
Just as a follow-up to John's question, on the ACT, will they be taking the writing portion? Do you know?
Yes, every
They are,
student is
okay.
going to, it will include the writing test,
So I had one.
which honestly, Julie, we did not believe was going to be the case.
Yeah.
But then this summer, they said, no, we've really thought about it, and everybody's going to take the writing test too.
Of course.
I'm sorry,
So I had one follow-up. The teacher evaluation implementation this year, what would parents notice was different? Is there anything that's transparent to the community on that?
Well, the one piece that will be in place is that there will be strategies that that teachers will be choosing to get engagement feedback. And they'll be looking at having that with students. I don't know if any teachers are thinking about doing something with parents, but our principals are doing something with parents. So Matt, you might want to share detail there.
Yeah, the plan that we have does not include additional feedback from parents on individual teacher evaluation. We collect that through the annual climate surveys through the buildings. What I think that a parent would notice, without being in the classroom, my sense would be with the more frequent classroom visits that are under the Kim Marshall model, you're going to have students who are going to see their building administrators or district level administrators. We plan to go into classrooms
We all
this year.
signed up.
And so the idea is that by that more consistent presence in the classroom, we're going to be able to provide more authentic feedback to staff. And so I think students will see administrators in their academic classrooms way more often than they did in the past. That would be the piece if I were a parent. Not that my child comes home and says, my principal was in my classroom today, but we think when a parent calls with a concern, building principals are going to be able to say, I've been in that classroom 3 times in the last 2 weeks, and here's what I've observed.
Okay. Thanks. Okay.
Anything else?
Anything else?
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, we are ready to move on to our second item for discussion, which is the school board work session follow-up.
And Matt and I are just going to kind of tag team on this piece. I told him it would depend on how well my voice handled talking more. But what we'd really like to do tonight is just to kind of come back. We've actually created a summary document. It's kind of, again, you see the modus operandi here. Everything is 2 pages of 1 sheet of paper. But this basically is kind of coming back and kind of summarizing what we've done up to this point. And then when we get to the second page, we've got some pieces we want to talk to you about. So what you'll see on the front page is the results of the June 9th meeting, the July 14th meeting, in the August 20th meeting. What you'll see is the key findings, and we just tried to encapsulate the demographic pieces, that we're looking at 100 to 200 student drop, that we're looking at loss at the elementary first, with some regaining of students in the second 5 years, that we're looking at middle school being fairly stable in the first 5, but dropping in the second 5, and enrollment in the high school actually to grow in the first 5 and then basically level off but not really start to drop. And that we know that looking at the housing starts, at least for the next 2 years, we don't believe that the housing starts are going to impact the enrollment. We know that when we did the July 14th, basically ATS&R gave you building level deferred maintenance and educational needs, did not put any costs on those, but did pictorial charts so you could kind of see what was happening. We did a theoretical capacity, which basically said, based on theoretical capacity of the classroom spaces we had, we really don't need additional regular classrooms. But we also determined that while we have theoretical capacity to do things, many of our non-regular education classrooms are overcrowded. So what's been happening is that although we have enough room spaces for K-5 and 6-8 and 9-12, what we don't have is enough rooms for all the EL, all the special ed, all the RTI intervention, all the mentoring spaces, all of the Accelerate Northfield spaces, all the other things that we need to have in order to meet the needs of our kids. So that's really the struggle in terms of trying to look at theoretical capacities. It really only deals with, do you have identified classrooms enough for the kids you have? That's fine, you do, but what you have is for most of those kids who are in special ed, they are in 2 different rooms during the day. For most of our EL kids, they're in 2 rooms during the day. For kids who are working with Accelerate Northfield or whatever, may be doing that in their classroom, but they may be doing it in another space. So then on the 20th, we kind of walked through the process of kind of underscoring that, that the meeting on the 20th was really not to find solutions, but rather to kind of understand the difficult challenges. And it's the balance of the pieces. How do we balance deferred maintenance with educational adequacy, and how do we balance those against how do we think about trying to respond to 21st century teaching strategies and approaches. And so we kind of framed it in that format. We went through and reviewed the findings from the enrollment. We went through ATS&R this time gave you a building by building reflection of the deferred maintenance pieces with dollar signs attached to each piece. Pretty big number when you looked at individual buildings and the total amount. We talked about the fact that a number of the initiatives that are there are going to be addressed as part of our regular 10-year plan. But we also know that there are larger concerns that can't necessarily be addressed through the 10-year plan alone. And we also know that in the end, when this master facilities plan is ready to go, we need to get the 10-year plan aligned with ATS&R's plan. So whatever plan you agree to as a district master facilities plan, we need then to tie the 10-year plan directly into that so that they match up. The other piece we talked about was the building level educational adequacy pieces. And just to give you, the highlight pieces, we really said we have core spaces in many of our buildings that aren't right sized. We've got buildings either that were for smaller enrollments and the enrollments have grown and additions have been added, but the cafeteria stayed the same, or the media center stayed the same, or the music area stayed the same. We know that drop-off and pickup areas are a problem in several of the buildings. I don't know if any of you have driven past Greenville Park today, but although the parking lot is still closed off, all of the parking lot has been repaved, expanded. The front driveway's been paved and expanded. They're putting jersey barriers in tomorrow, and then that'll be ready to go. So we're trying to address some of those pieces, but that's an ongoing issue. Middle school is still an issue. Bridgewater is still a significant issue. High school is still a significant issue in terms of that piece. The third kind of takeaway from that piece is that there does not now exist equality in spaces. If you remember, we talked about issues about how many music room spaces do we have, what is the size of the cafeteria, what is the size of the media center. how we tried to address those pieces, and the fact that if people are looking to have, I have the same kind of music space or the same kind of art space or the same kind of, you name it. Every building is a little bit different setup. We also identified building accessibility as an educational adequacy need, and especially at the high school and at Longfellow, it's really problematic for several of the programs that we have because there are steps up and down, or there are landings or areas where if kids want to get to parts of the building, it's difficult to get there, and they have to go through somebody else's room to get to another room. All those problematic. Again, the framing and the difference between design capacity and reality. Again, with the fact that special ed, ELL, intervention programs, Accelerate Northfield, all those, none of those pieces existed when most of these buildings were built. And so where we have that issue with the difference between design capacity and what we really need to operate, we don't have those pieces in place. We also know that early childhood and special education are particularly short on space. We know that we could continue to add more special ed and EL programming if we had more places to put things. And what we know is we have defined limits for both of those programs in terms of how many kids can actually be in a room with a certain number of adults. So we know that continues to be an issue, even though the numbers go up. And then finally, the last piece that we did last week was we went through an exercise to articulate kind of a facilities vision, as I see it. It's kind of like, what are the guiding principles? And the question was, if you could design space that accommodates and supports the changes in teaching and learning process today, what would it look like? And so what ATS&R has done for us is kind of said, let's kind of boil it down to 7 or 8 kind of key points. We talked about creating spaces that were flexible, that could change size and shape to fit different needs, a place where teachers can work collaboratively as professionals and with students, a place where real-world learning experiences could be part of every student's education, so that it doesn't feel as much like a school as it feels like a place I can work, a place that I can be involved. Really creating spaces where there's an intentionality of creating a sense of community. That one's a hard one to get your arms around, but the idea of how do you get a place where people come in and say, this is home, this is where I belong, whatever, and knowing that some of the other things we're doing have a tendency to almost go in the opposite direction, like creating more security and security program. We looked at the creation of spaces that accommodate both current and future programming needs, flexible and interchangeable. So the idea being that instead of building a building, as we've had concerns over the years with Greenville Park because of the struggle with the fact that it's built as an open space building and you really can't close it up and you really can't reconfigure it, it's the idea of saying you really need a building that can be open when it needs to be, that can be closed up when it needs to be, and that can, I guess it would be the equivalent of an educational transformer. It could really adjust itself. We're looking for spaces that support modeling of skills and knowledge and behaviors so that every student can kind of function in it in the way that they will in a technologically advanced 21st century world, that we can look at a variety of different instructional methods. So if coaching is the strategy we need to use, or mentoring is the strategy we need to use, or bringing a community expert in is the strategy we use, we can do that cleanly and easily without having to stop and say, I'm sorry, we can't go here, or the multipurpose room is full today, or the auditorium is too big, or whatever. And then finally, that allow opportunities to integrate technological literacy into learning, again, matching the use of technology when acquiring and creating knowledge. So I think the board and cabinet did a really nice job of kind of identifying, and really there was a lot of commonality between the work from the 3 groups. So that's kind of where we got through the end of the meeting last week, which then kind of brings us to tonight in terms of kind of where we are. I think, first of all, what I want to share with you is just something that I want you to kind of think about and say, yeah, that probably covers it, or no, it doesn't. We try to kind of come back and say, really, what is the objective of this entire process? And what we described was the objective of developing and acting upon a district master facilities plan through the collaborative efforts of board, professional staff, community, designers, and engineers. What's the purpose? This effort will strive to ensure that the building and grounds of the Northfield Public Schools will be well-maintained, efficiently operated, and effectively support educational programs and services. So it really kind of reflects on the concept of stewardship and maintenance of the existing spaces. It looks at what do we need to do to address efficiency issues, but it also addresses the fact that we need to think about effectiveness. And so I guess before we go any farther, any initial thoughts in terms of that description as an objective? Because I would tell you what we're kind of trying to work toward tonight is to think about having you give us some direct feedback and discussion about what have you heard so far that makes sense to you, or you think we're on track moving forward, and then what we actually want to lay out is some possible next steps for you to give us some feedback. So talk to us a little bit about the objective. This is wait time.
That's right, you're doing a good job.
Appropriate wait time.
It's the silent close.
Yes.
I guess the way I see it, it seems to me that we need to be deliberate about this and look at all these elements carefully, as we talked about last week, to differentiate between our punch list and our wish list and figure out how we balance those two items given our resources. But part of what concerns me about about the process is one of the things I keep hearing is about openness and moving, and I think about Greenvale Park when it was built 44 years ago, and as an open school.
71 or whatever it was, yes.
Yeah, something like that, as an open school, and now we spent a number of years kind of closing it down, and now we say we want to open it up because we were right in the first place, or what. And I guess I want to make sure that we're not making mistakes in terms of what we're doing. I would like to make sure that if we develop a plan moving forward, that we're all confident that it's the plan that makes sense rather than the plan that's close enough. So I would look for a really deliberative process and have a real opportunity for, I think, community input and board input and take our time in doing this and not try and get it done right away.
Okay, and I just need to ask Danita, are you capturing for me now? I appreciate that. Yeah, and I think that's going to be a key piece of this is as we go through this process, I shared with you last week, there's no rush to this. I think there are steps that we need to think about and how they need to play together. But no, this is not something that by next month we have to have a plan. But I also think the alternative is we can admire the problem for 2 years, and that won't get us where we want to go either. So it is trying to find kind of that middle road. And I guess the concept of the objective initially was trying to say, does that really capture kind of the pieces that we want to make sure happen? That we want maintenance of what we have, that we want efficiency in terms of operation, but we also want to effectively support programming and learning. And that there may be some things about those that will either go very nicely together, or they may smack right up against each other because maintaining everything we have just as it is may not take us where we want to go in terms of supporting effectiveness.
No?
Yeah, I was going to say, you need to run this part. I'll just shut up and let you run it.
Well, the thing I've noticed in all the discussions is that, AT, SNR, said, and everyone has said, that we're operating from a position of strength, that they come into some schools and see them falling down around them, and that's not where we are. So it seems like whatever we do, we have to maintain that position of strength. So we're continuing to maintain what we have. And yeah, so it's the balancing act of, as you say, the wish list and the punch list. But I think we have to keep doing the day-to-day things to keep us in the position of strength before we go off into the atmosphere on the wish list,
what
I
might
guess.
be the wish?
Yeah. Because if we lose that basic position of strength, then it's harder to do the things that we wish we could do.
And I think the only thing as we go forward is understanding that there may be conflicts between those three ideas, especially if you get to the point where, in terms of trying to create effectiveness, you identify that a building, regardless of how well you've kept it up, just can't do the job that you want it to do for the next 20 years. And so it may need to be reconfigured. It may need to be set up to do a different job. It isn't that we don't have a building that isn't usable for something anymore, but it may not be usable for the thing it's being used for now.
Yeah. So then I guess if we're thinking about what are the major trends that we're looking for over the next 10 or 20 years, I mean, if we look right now at Sibley, we say the spaces are too small. If we look at Greenville right now, we say the spaces are too open or something like that. So how do we come up with a consistent vision for each of these different buildings that are very different? So, I mean, we have to come up with a way of being very flexible across the district rather than just saying, okay, this building has this problem, let's fix it, and, you know, so
It is kind of the
difficult.
it's kind of the Goldilocks piece of, is it too big, too small, or just right?
Yeah.
And you're right, Rob, in the fact that each of our buildings has some strengths and it has weaknesses. But I think the thing that John pointed to earlier was the concept that as you think about what you're doing with like a building like Greenville Park, it isn't that open spaces for some things might not be the ideal situation. It's just that it can't change. So, you know, it isn't that it's necessarily bad because it's open. It's bad because it can't close up or be more structured when it needs to be and more open when it needs to be.
Yeah, so how do you take what you have now and make it more
And
flexible
redo that.
based on what you're having to work with?
Exactly.
I think that's especially important when we think that a building's life cycle, you know, is somewhere between 75 and 100 years. You think about even when Greenville Park was opened, it was built with some of the best thinking of the time. And things do come back in vogue as we see some of those pieces now. But I think as we talk about that flexibility of buildings, it's about how over the life cycle of the envelope, of the building envelope, the four walls, the keeping the inside dry and all those things that go to maintaining the building, how can we make them flexible enough to adapt with the times without significant investment to retool them, if that makes sense. That's what I've been thinking about along those lines, Rob.
Of course, the best thinking of the time also included leisure suits.
Yes, yes.
Jacques Penet.
Yes.
Joel?
I certainly support and agree with what John said. He talks about the punch list and the wish list, but I believe there's a third one in there, and that's a certain amount of practicality, which I think this district has a lot of. And I would be so bold as to say that this district has more common sense than we sometimes see north of us, particularly at the Department of Education, who I believe frequently is made up of career people who may or may not have an idea that what they have in mind is going to last and be right for the next 20 years. But I think we've got the experience, and I don't know how this fits into having a room that's too big or too small, but I sometimes think the people that are defining the size of the room aren't necessarily the ones that have to use the room. And I would I would be encouraging us to look at a common sense approach, not necessarily what the directive is that comes out. We speak of Greenvale School. My oldest son was the first class in that Greenvale School. He thought they built it directly for him. One of the blessings of Greenvale School was that we had all of the research from the educators in California about how to build it. One of the best things living in the Midwest, in my mind, is that sometimes ideas from California get lost before they get here. And so we don't have to pay attention to them. They found their death somewhere along the way. But
I'll make it over the mountains soon.
yeah, I think that we've demonstrated to people north of us that there's a fair amount of common sense in this district, and I would hope that that would prevail in some of the thought processes that we have. Long answer, but thanks to John and Rob and others.
Any other reflections you have on kind of this, the objective as we've kind of tried to make it? Because again, it was just an effort on our part to kind of say, when we're thinking about things, you know, what need to be kind of the underlying pinnings.
My comment, and the one that resonated with me, was how we effectively support the educational programs, because we have this overarching goal of educational excellence, and then we're talking about educational adequacy, and I see that we have all of these tremendous resources going towards student achievement, and how are we going to allow or modify our facilities in order to be able to, you know, facilitate all of the student achievement programs that we have going, Title I, and all these really, really good programs. And if we have this sort of challenges from a facilities need, you know, how are we going to, that's the key piece. How do we merge that, you know, and how do we make that the facilities really work towards, you know, the resources need to follow the need, and we've identified student achievement needs as paramount, and how is that we going to bring the facilities along to help with those goals.
What we don't want is the facilities hindering our ability to make that happen, which in some cases right now they do. And I think probably the piece I would say to you right now is the most hindering for elementary buildings is one of the things that we think is the greatest thing we've worked on in the last few years, which is kind of the reinvention of flexible grouping, which requires you to be able to take a group of students in fourth grade and on any given day move them 3 or 4 times to different places in the fourth grade area so that we can teach them at their instructional level. And yet to do that, we got to take them out of a closed door, down a hallway, and back into another room. And every time we do that, we play a fairly significant shuffle game, and then you got to get kids back on track again.
So the only thing I would have also echoed what Julie said about the effectively, and what I like about that is you had talked earlier about the equality in spaces, and I would not want to have that be part of this statement, because I think while I understand where that's coming from, I think it's dangerous to start thinking about all the spaces in that way. If the spaces include the green spaces, there's limits to what we can do, and if we set ourselves up for kind of failure, and thinking about what Noel said in terms of a common sense approach, I think we want to be mindful of that and be mindful of the equity of the spaces. But I think as long as we're thinking about the effective use of them and that flexibility, then we don't have to worry as much maybe. So I guess I like the way that it's worded here.
All right, so again, and our thinking was using this as kind of the opening piece when we get to the point where we're ready to begin talking to buildings and staff and students and community and whatever, is to be able, I think most people want to kind of know where you're headed. And I think if you're saying you got kind of something you're going at from at least 3 different directions, because what I also want them to understand that we're not playing checkers. We're probably playing 3-dimensional chess. So we need to be able to support students in multiple ways, and we need to support staff in multiple ways. And there's probably not a simplistic answer. Okay. All right. So talk to us a little bit about otherwise the work of these first 3 meetings. Are there other takeaways or other, because the thing that Matt and I discussed today is kind of, you really didn't have an opportunity at the end of the work session to kind of really say, this piece really makes sense to me, what do I think about the kind of the guiding principles of the space piece? Any takeaways that came out of the deferred maintenance pieces, or any things that came out of the educational adequacy pieces that really struck you as, this is something we really need to explore, or I really don't agree with it, or I really am uncomfortable with kind of framing it in that way? Because again, I think before we kind of take the next step, we want to kind of come back through and just make sure that people are comfortable with the pieces that they've heard so far, and that each one, kind of like a building block, has given you an additional piece to think about as you're going forward through the process.
Well, there's
I looked at Rob. I knew he was going to talk first.
Although we've got really good projections and Hazel Reinhardt is able to look into the future and get things within 5 students, there are certain ways in which we cannot see what the future is going to be. One of them clearly is special education. We don't know what's going to be demanded of us. We just recently built a new addition mostly for special education, and it's already not adequate. So it's a little bit hard to plan for that. I'm not suggesting any solutions. I'm just saying that's something that concerns me, that no matter what we plan, there's going to be something unexpected. Another example I'm thinking about is we're talking about the buildings, but there's the discussion of the athletic facilities and the outdoor spaces, and there's been a lot of discussion about how the elementary gyms are used for high school sports, and that may be problematic. We might want to look at that. Last year we voted to add lacrosse as a varsity sport, and when that was presented, it wasn't presented as a problem that would tear up Memorial Field if we had lacrosse matches there. So that was, for me, an unanticipated consequence of adding lacrosse. And I personally would be very uncomfortable with saying we need to have AstroTurf so that we can have lacrosse in Memorial Field. So I think, there has to be a kind of, as we add things and as we think about what programs we're going to add, what are the sort of ripple effects on the facilities that will result from that, because it's a little bit alarming to go from a very unassuming, let's have lacrosse, to now we need to have AstroTurf, which is, $1 million every 6 years or something.
Well, and even with that piece, then you also have the other issue of, do you have enough practice spaces now for everybody, and which practice spaces are overlapping? Plus, you also have probably the most glaring piece that I see right now, which is the quality of our locker room spaces, which are, I'd say if we go around the Big Nine, we have the worst locker room spaces in the entire conference, by far. And I think our gym now is much better with the new floor and the new floor up above. But think about where you have the most gyms. You build them on the middle school. So it automatically triggers the middle school being another location for high school programming, because typically other districts of our size would have 2 full-size gyms on the high school, plus probably an auxiliary gym. We also have a lot of spaces right now for athletic and FIAD activities right now that are very single-purposed. So like you have a weight room that really is a weight room. You've got a wrestling room that, because of the temperature, really for the most part is a wrestling room, and really is not something that people want to be in other than when they gotta. So, but you're right. I mean, there's all of those things that are kind of going on, and each one of them has monetary impacts. And especially if we're trying to address some of those pieces going forward, again, it's this whole issue of flexibility, which would probably be the argument on the flip side for AstroTurf, because what people would say to you is you've now created a much more flexible space, not only for practice in multiple seasons, but also performance in multiple seasons that you can't do right now because you don't want to put your foot on the football field till after it's grown over the summer and you've got a mature grass.
I just remember Bubba Sullivan saying it was the best turf that they play on in the...
Yeah.
So,
best grass
until there's
there.
that beautiful grass.
Other takeaways from any of our activities over these last couple of months? Because I think before we kind of talk about possible next steps, to kind of ask you to tell us and think about what you think about those steps. Just looking for any other kind of takeaways you have or thoughts you have about what you've heard so far.
Julie? Well, to me, it was really helpful to see the deferred maintenance, to see that list bubble up and what that bubbled up list means, and that why we are extremely grateful to our taxpayers for our capital projects levy, which has allowed us to maintain where we are. But between those dollars and deferred maintenance out of the general operating budget, there's going to be a shortfall, and that's going to be a really important thing to address, but also going to stretch resources. And that was really good to see that and to be able to know what we have coming in that piece of it.
John?
I guess, and not to repeat myself, but I think what I took away from all that presentation was that when we look at those punch list items and those wish list items, is there really isn't a bright line between them, and that if we do this properly, we can accomplish some of those goals while taking care of the deferred maintenance items and reduce the total cost. Whereas if we just go and go down the list one by one in some sort of order and then go and try and address all the other issues, we could be repeating the work. Whereas if we do this and evaluate everything as a whole, it seems to me that we could accomplish our goals, a lot of our goals, at a lower cost and avoid some of the deferred maintenance items while improving the educational experience.
Which I think kind of reflects back on your earlier discussion about taking our time to make sure that we really have looked through everything that there is to look at and think about how doing one thing is going to impact something else. Because I think that's a lot of what you're seeing now is that when you start talking about some of the things we're looking at, your choice to do a roof eliminates your choice to do something else, or your choice to say we really need to move from a steam boiler to a hot water boiler at Greenville Park, for all intents and purposes, eats up 2 full years of your total capital budget for one set of work. And so, and in the meantime, roofs still age, HVAC units still age, air handling units still age, parking lots still disintegrate, all the things. So it's really trying to kind of keep all those pieces going forward together.
So I had 2 things. One is piggybacking on what Rob was talking about, which is some of these unanticipated. We talked about futuristic kind of spaces, but what I was curious about, and I know we can't predict this, was some of the other things that would impact space, like our neighbors to our east have 4-year-old kindergarten. Do we think that, that would have a major impact if we suddenly had 4-year-olds in the building and they just had I think it was Sunday's paper about the shortage of childcare, and what if the schools had to start assuming that? And then the flip side, we have online learning, and what if that developed, then we don't have bodies in potentially the building. So there's these 2 things going on, and how do you anticipate that? And I think we saw some of that with the fact that Bridgewater was built without kindergarten classrooms because we thought, Longfellow would always, be what it was. So thinking a little bit about what do we know, what do we think do we see any of that happening in the next 3-5 years? And then the other side of it is the unanticipated cost of building spaces that are anticipating teaching strategies where we need to make sure we have significant professional development. So, it's not just the cost of the deferred maintenance and the building spaces, but also making sure that our teachers feel like they're well supported and equipped to make use of this space. Because, what a tragedy to think they have a lovely space, but, boy, you better spend a lot of money in the summer on your own to try to figure out how to teach in this space. That would be unfortunate.
Yeah.
So.
Because in my mind, one of the most telling pieces that we got out of the last several meetings was Tom's kind of flippant comment about, unfortunately, buildings don't come with instruction manuals. And you really think about Greenville Park, that's the big prize. I mean, they created this based on, here was the best thinking of those California, that haven't fallen off into the ocean yet, but they're on our ability to getting together and presenting an idea, all the electronics and whatever are set up so that can be done in multiple ways, and that there's very little in terms of permanent kinds of wall spaces. And even in terms of how it's configured as far as who's next to whom, because I know when we visited Best Buy, when I was in OSU, and we were trying to think about that process, what we figured out is that, in traditional buildings, the administration was in the very middle of the building, or they were in a part of the building that got the best outside views. And they ended up creating the Best Buy where all of the people that are the line level workers are the ones that have the view to the outside. And so, you totally rethink the way you're doing it because you're trying to get a different kind of collaboration. Any other thoughts in terms of that piece? Otherwise, I'm ready to have us jump into the other part. Matt, you want to grab this next piece? Because sure, my throat is just about gone.
I stand ready. So for the next piece, what we're just looking at is what would you be comfortable in terms of the next steps, in terms of looking at additional kinds of information. And so specifically, we've talked about the needs that have been established or discussed. What is the next step in terms of involving other people's thought processes? And what that could include, some things that it might include, it could include us having some pieces about having ATS&R come to us with some broad approaches in terms of the things that we've heard. We've heard about deferred maintenance pieces, flexibility, interchangeability, these other kinds of pieces. What are some broad themes that other districts who have faced these kinds of issues, what are some broad themes that they have looked at in terms of attempting to address them? Not solutions, but broad themes in terms of here are a handful of pathways that districts have gone. And then determining at that point, at what point in time do we have enough information or direction among ourselves where we could involve other stakeholders and actually have authentic conversations where we could get meaningful feedback from them. Because we've talked tonight about a number of different pieces that we're comfortable with and some we're uncomfortable with, and things we have questions on, and decisions about where we're going, and balancing the practical with the direction. I think we'd get very similar pieces if we took it directly to people now in terms of our internal stakeholders and our external stakeholders. So one strategy is to have ATS&R give us a thought process about here are some broad things you could consider to address some of these questions that you've come up with. And then once we feel we've got enough with that, we can certainly go out and talk with people in the community, both our internal community, our people who use the buildings. That's a very important thing, asking the folks who teach in classrooms every day, what is working well for you? What's working well in our building? Asking our students, what has worked well in this building? What are things that could be better about the building? What, if you could wish something that we had in this building, what might it be? Those would be questions that at a point where you determine might be very telling for us in terms of some of the directions we might want to go in terms of the master facility plan. And then after that point, a piece that we would look at is that ATS&R would help us by developing that preliminary master facility plan based upon those initial broad themes, based on some of the feedback from those potential stakeholders, and then putting together the plan that we would review as an administrative team to say, here are things that we think have merit, here are things that we're still concerned about. Again, another check before we bring it to you in terms of, say, this is our preliminary plan. And then once we even have that preliminary plan, we'd even go back out to the community and talk with them again about, okay, we talked with you before, we secured some of your ideas, we secured some of the things that you thought were going well, things that could be improved, things that we could wish for. We have put those in, and here are some potential ideas that we have for a facilities plan. I think the important thing is that our facilities plan, I think, is going to look different than a lot of other facilities plans because of the fact that many people only do this when they're in crisis, which I think makes this harder. This makes this harder because there is nothing for us to look at and say, that's what needs to be taken care of. And yet having that vision for 20 years will do what we all hope for. We're hoping to maintain those buildings. We're hoping to have common sense in those approaches. And so our plan is going to look different. It's going to be a punch list to a certain extent. And there will be other things involved in that punch list as well that may not necessarily even be things that are needed right now, but will be in 10 years or in 15 years. Because some of those things we can see that far out on. You saw the deferred maintenance where we know 2020, we've got a roof that we have to look at. We can look out that far. So as Chris and I have worked with Tom and Mark and really tried to look at this, what we think are just some things we want some feedback from you on is this potential pathway forward in terms of a piece of having ATS&R come back and say, based upon the questions you generated, based upon the things that you said, here are some broad themes that we'd like you to consider as part of moving forward. After we talk with those pieces, we can then determine, are we at a point, or at what point do we go and solicit other feedback, preliminary feedback, again, no solutions, just themes, from the community, staff, students, other interested community members. And then finally keep rolling down the path of having a formal facilities plan drafted by people who do this as their profession with our input as well. And then after that has come forward and we've had a chance to mark that up a bit, take that back to the community to say, here's what our draft is, what do you think of that? And so that's just one pathway that Chris and I have looked at moving forward that would give us enough time to do due diligence. We don't have to rush on this. Nothing is staring us in the face that has to be done tomorrow. But it would be good to have a plan within a reasonable amount of time that we can use as our map moving forward. We have a map for nearly everything else. If you think about all of our other plans, we have all sorts of plans for everything else. It's striking to me that we don't have a master facility plan for the district.
And I think just to help frame a little bit on this first item, when Matt and I talked to Tom and Mark this morning, the concept here is when we would go out to talk to the community, we would share information about the deferred maintenance. We'd share information about educational adequacy. We would talk to them about kind of the visioning that was done around, we'd like to create spaces that look like this. But the other thing we need to help people think a little bit about is the concept that over the course of the time that ATS&R has worked with hundreds of different school districts, what are some of the strategies that are out there that get used? Well, you have strategies where you actually construct something, you build an addition, you build a new building, you do remodeling, you do restructuring of grade levels, you do repurposing of buildings, or you may do just minor kinds of remodeling, or you may say, we're going to change furniture out to give us more flexibility with furniture, and we're not going to do any other major project. So, I mean, you got a whole continuum of things. The feeling I think that we had in talking to the guys this morning was that without that kind of frame so that people know to get at these things, here are kind of the range of different ways that a district could go. Then you get back, the feedback you get back doesn't begin to take you towards saying, well, the interest is more in looking at doing with what we have and figuring out what the practical piece, doing with what we have without making many changes? Or is it, no, we really have some buildings that maybe have reached the end of their useful life cycle, or will shortly, and they either need to be repurposed or dropped? Or do we need buildings that, if we simply have different grades in that building, it would work better? Or fewer grades in that building? Or as some of the things we talked about last year, where we talked about leveled buildings, obviously would change the kinds of needs that each building would have. But I guess the thinking was just saying...
Or some other things that aren't facility
Yeah.
related too. I mean, in terms of thinking of boundary, we've talked about that
About
before.
boundaries.
Is that a tool that some districts have used to address some of these concerns?
And
There
and
could
so
be nothing. There could be some things where you say intentionally, we're going to leave this part alone, because there's not a better solution at this point. So it's a range of ideas of ways that people have gone.
And again, only because I think without adding that piece, people are left kind of drifting with, well, what do you really need to know from me? And so I think without kind of, and again, not trying to steer them toward any one strategy, just understanding that it isn't just all about, well, gee, we should just build a new building, or gee, we should just do X. It's that over the course of a school district working with architectural firms, there's been this broad variety of different ways that you could attack this issue. As well as not only telling us what you think about some of the ideas, help us to think about some of the strategies at the 50,000-foot level.
My first question would be, as part of the contract we have with ATSR, would this next step then be an additional fee?
We believe this is all part of because what they signed on for was to take us to a master
Was to
facility.
create a plan.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And until the plan is done, until we have a district master plan in front, and they understand that a district master plan has to be not only the analyzing all the parts, but it also needs to be saying, and here are our recommendations for how you move forward over this next 20 years to address these things. So, no, they're signed on for the long term, which is a great thing.
Yeah,
I hope that the web of kindness, it's whatever, doesn't go away. But no, right now,
Okay.
I believe from talking to them,
I would agree.
they believe they're on board to get whatever else done. And, they were really concerned even about, well, do you want us to go out and do all the meetings with the community? And we said, well, no, we probably think it makes more sense to have administrators do the meetings with the community. You can sure be there so you can hear what things are being said, but it probably makes a lot more sense for building administrators and district administrators to run the meetings, because you've got built-in rapport with people in your building that you can work from. But we also want them to take all that data away, because that will be part of the process of building a plan going forward.
I got about a shotgun approach to several things that have been said here. I want to make sure that, let me start by saying Greenville School, and by the way, there's another school just like it in Wisconsin. We might want to contact them and see what they did.
But if the walls are up yet?
There is another one over there somewhere, I'm told. The architect apparently just changed the title. But in any event, Greenville School was built with a strategy in mind and asked for volunteers who would be willing to staff that building. They presented an educational approach and asked if they'd be willing to support that educational approach. I know one individual who had been in the classroom 6 weeks and said, why did I ever sign up for this? I can't. Anyway, listed off about 4 things that were very difficult. He liked a confined classroom with a door. A lot of other things from there. So with that in mind, and that as a backdrop to, I want to make sure that what I said isn't misconstrued. I'm not unwilling to not make changes. I want to make sure that we're thoughtful, because I think Chris is exactly right. It is not a checkerboard we're dealing with. It's three-dimensional. Some of the things we're looking at might be, for example, start times, which affects the athletic program. Yeah. I mean,
Everything in schools
yeah,
is
it's an octopus. And so, anyhow, yeah, I guess I'll stop right there.
Well, I guess what we try to do is paint a potential pathway, because we're concerned if we don't have some guidelines or some guideposts, so to speak, that we'll be wandering, and we don't want that. You know, we want to be able to move forward and gain some opinions and see where some of those pieces lie. And again, in some cases, there may be some real synergy around specific actions as we get down the road. There may also be real synergy about, you know what, leave this alone. This is just fine for now. Where we're at in the life cycle of our buildings, that is a legitimate option in some cases. So it isn't that we have to choose something way out of the box. It's just a matter of having a process to evaluating all those pieces and saying what's right for us. And we have the fortune of being able to do that because nothing's falling down around us.
So when you talk about the pathway and the authentic discussions with the school community, is that opening, I'm not sure when I see that, if that's like how we did the budget kind of plan where you had some intentional groups of people brought in for this aspect, or if this is, you know, more like the compañeros where we had the sessions at the different buildings about it, but anybody who showed up was...
This morning, we actually talked about compañeros.
Okay.
As maybe the initial piece, in that I think there are two ways to attack this, and actually Noel talked about, or shared with me one thought, I think kind of at the end of the meeting last week, of, well, you know, do we bring together kind of that expert community committee to take a look at this and kind of give us their feedback. My gut is that we're trying to get a broader set of feedback, and I think to do that, I think it is setting up, you know, meetings at each building, encouraging the building principal to get staff there, letting the building principal use their clout to be able to draw parents and others in to basically, you know, again, I'd love to be able to use the district committee, the student committee, the youth council, to basically be a sounding board in this building for another group to work from. But the idea being that I think this one is one where you want to draw a broad range of folks from as many different places as you can. At some point, you may want to have that more expert group, but I think in this piece, I think you want to start broad, and if you need to narrow, you can narrow. And, you know, but if that's not, I mean, this is really parts where, as a board, you really need to help us think this thing through, because I think, as Matt and I have talked about this with Mark and Tom, it was the idea of saying, if we have a meeting in every building and we invite all staff to be involved, and we either have a follow-up that same day with parents, and we get encouragement, you know, to get parents to come so that we have something that goes into the evening to grab parent feedback and input. We also do something with the youth council to basically get their feedback. Now we got 8 different sets of people looking at it, and they're looking at it from what probably makes the most sense to them, which is the building that their kid currently is in, and the staff that is currently in that building. And I think that if you try to get too narrow with, well, we're going to take a representative from every building and a parent from every building, I think you lose the focus, and you lose the enthusiasm that people might have for trying to share their ideas, because
I think you'd lose the ownership. Lose the ownership.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Did you have...
I had one other thought that while I was talking and rambling on. I hope that our consultants are comfortable to not only help us lead us down the road that worked in other schools, but also tell us something that didn't work somewhere, so that we can see both sides of that coin.
they're at a point where they've already, I think, been thrown a little bit this morning when we kind of called them up and said, we really need to, because I think they were thinking, well, we're ready to go right to the engagement piece of the buildings. And I said, are we really ready to be there yet? Do you think the board is really ready to be there yet? Well, and they thought, well, maybe we could just start and try to get that and then come back and share that with the board and then build the plan. And I just, and if this is experience or whatever, it's just my sense that we're going to get a better product if we give people kind of what are the major building blocks that you're playing with. And then when they're trying to give us feedback, they not only know we got these kind of needs, but also, the district is not locked into the only way we're going to fix this is by doing X. It is the old line about, if all you have is a hammer, everything in the world is a nail. It's the whole idea here of trying to think about this in a way that says, boy, there may be a lot of different ways that we could get at this. And also not losing the other piece, which is very likely that as we go through this, we may figure out that something that one building needs will interact with something that another building needs. Or something that's a deterrent in one building may actually be a benefit someplace else. And by putting the two together, we get that synergistic, symbiotic relationship. I step out of the box again. Never mind.
I think the one thing that if we've learned...
I'm too late for that. You're too late for that smart stuff.
If you think of one of the things that I've learned since I've been here is how many community engagement kinds of things we've done. And almost, if you think about every single one we've done, there's been some brilliant idea that none of us at the beginning had thought of that you can directly trace to those community meetings, because someone who uses the facilities or engages in it every day has just a little bit of a different take that we didn't have the context for. And whether it be the compañeros or transformational technology or budget pieces or whatever, all of those different pieces where we've involved a broad stakeholder group with some parameters, some loose parameters, we have invariably brought together an idea that has been outstanding that we have used in the final product. And I really think that that's the way to go.
Well, and going right back to the compañeros example, the final solution on the compañeros piece was not A, B, or C. It was B+, B2, something. It was a combination of pieces that ended up working better, and that people in the community said, I feel much better about this as an alternative than any of the straight options that we had, which is where I see the power of having the group coming together.
Julie?
Once in the compañeros took place at the building level, and they were very well attended. I felt like we got really good attendance. That was really very engaged.
My sense is, too, we have a couple of windows. We have a window that's kind of November or October, late September, October, early November. And we have another window that's midwinter. So if we choose to do this, it would be good, I think, to try to target the initial piece probably in October, to try to get those done when we have the most engagement and the weather isn't crappy yet. My second choice is to do it in January, February, where the problem is every time we do it, it'll be a crapshoot as to whether the weather messes us up or keeps parents away or whatever. But it sounds like I'm not hearing from people that beyond kind of the presentation on the broad range of possible approaches that could come out of this, not saying we're going to fix building X with option Y, but just kind of broad range of here's the different ways we can do it, that you guys are pretty comfortable with kind of doing that and then reaching out to the community to see where they are? I'm seeing head shaking.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So we'll look at, I'm going to guess it's most likely going to be that we would have ATS&R here on the 25th for the second meeting in September.
22nd.
The 22nd, yes.
22nd.
Today's the 25th, right? So
Yes.
yes, the second meeting in September, I think, is probably when we can realistically have them here with their overall themes.
be behind the scenes gearing up for the ask out in the community. And working with building principals to think about what's a good time for your building to do this kind of thing, especially if we're looking at a time to get feedback from staff, and then potentially an additional time to get feedback from parents.
Thank you, that gives us good direction.
Super, thank you very much. That is really helpful as we move forward with this process.
All right. So
Okay, all good.
we will wait to hear from you on the next episode, end of September, it sounds like.
Yes.
Okay. Great. So we are ready to move on to our third item for discussion and report, and what I wanted to do is just summarize the superintendent's evaluation. As I described in previous years, we've used the Minnesota School Board Association form. All board members completed it. It has a scale of 49 job responsibilities are grouped into 10 categories, and that gives Dr. Richardson a kind of quantitative measure of how board members feel on a particular issue, and then board members are very generous with their written comments. And this year was no exception. Dr. Richardson received an outstanding performance review from all board members. 46 of the 49 items were rated outstanding. 3 items were rated as very good. As we heard from the celebrations and challenges report, many of the same sort of themes came up from board members in terms of recognizing Dr. Richardson's forward-thinking leadership and the way he's empowered his leadership team. The financial stewardship piece came through unanimously and clearly from all board members. The way the cabinet responded to the all-day kindergarten in a very authentic and accessible way with the community, the iPad one-to-one initiative, the hire of Kimberly, but also the thinking through that position description, the workforce development initiative at minus 27 degrees and getting 36 business people on board. A very impressive list of accomplishments, and the board recognized that. So I just wanted to put that out for board members, because I know you all do your individual evaluations and don't have a sense of where everybody else is at. And I guess I can say that we are all on the same page in terms of Dr. Richardson's outstanding performance and how very grateful we are for that, his leadership, and for his teams that he empowers as well.
Great team. Great team.
Any comments?
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you for taking all of this together, summarizing it. Thank you.
All right. Very good. All right. With that, we are ready to move on to our only item for individual action, which is a finalization of an employee discharge. So you have before you the superintendent's recommendation to finalize an employee's discharge, which would be effective on the end of the business day of, which was August 20th.
August 20th, correct.
So I would need a motion on the table.
I move it.
Moved by Noel.
Second.
Seconded by Julie. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. We are now ready to move on to our consent grouping, and there were some additional personnel items added in your table file. Is there anything anyone wishes to pull from the consent grouping? Okay. With that, I would ask for a motion to approve the consent grouping.
So moved.
Moved by John.
Second.
Seconded by Rob. All those in favor of approving the consent grouping, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The consent grouping is approved. Items for information. You had in your packet the workshop schedule, which is really helpful to see, and it's very exciting, all the work that Mary does. First with all the new teachers. What did we have, 30?
About 26.
26 last week, and now the workshop schedule for all our teaching staff. So anything you wanted to say about that?
Again, just that we're working with the Ready, Set, Go on 2 different days. I believe Sibley's going to do theirs tomorrow, and the other 2 buildings would do theirs on Thursday. And we kind of gave them the option to work out in their building what made the most sense to each building, and you can see the individual nature of the buildings in terms of what works best. You'll also notice there in the middle of the page that we have a joint meeting with Faribault with special education staff. And again, I think this is the power of the coordination and collaboration, is that we're getting a lot more of those things where we're doing joint activities, joint training, whatever, because it just, number one, it makes sense. Number two, it makes sure that everybody's operating under the same rules and procedures. And I think in the end just gives us that long-range piece. You also notice that a significant amount of technology support, because again, as we move teachers into the augmentation phase, we really need to help them do that. And then on Wednesday, you'll also notice there is PLC time in the morning for 2 hours. And again, that's really to get people off on a good start, but also understanding that there's even a little more importance than there has been in the past in the PLC goal, because the PLC goal is where they will reflect on their performance as a teacher and as a PLC in the teacher evaluation process, which we think is a really super way to make that all fit together. Because before, again, I think a piece where I think many districts in the state are really going to struggle will be on the fact that they are stuck with using the MCAs, and they have a bunch of people that the data on the MCAs doesn't say anything about anything that's happening with their teacher, their teaching or their colleagues' teaching, because they're teaching in an area that really isn't measured by the MCA. So this, we think, is a much more powerful way to go, and we will continue to use it unless the state at some point in the future says we can no longer do that anymore.
That's terrific. Okay, great. All right. With that, I will remind board members of future meetings. We are into September for those. And with that, I would ask for a motion for adjournment.
I move it.
Moved by Noel,
Second.
seconded by John. All those in favor of adjourning the meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting is adjourned.